You look the PowerPoint?
Yes.
No. In Iliad, fifth Rhapsody, Homer says that when the gods were in a semblance and were ready to eat and drink, robot tribots entered the room, bringing nectar and ambrosia to please the gods. These high-tech tripods were made by the godly blacksmith Hephaestus. But this masterly craftsman god of technology happened to be lame. He therefore was obliged to invent and manufacture two golden robot girls, alive, vivid, and talking, which were offering support to him when he was walking. But Greek mythology did not restrict its vision of automata to heavens only. High-tech was not meant to be an exclusive privilege of the gods, and so mythology turned from heaven to earth, expanding its vision of automata to human affairs too. Thus, two robot dogs made in gold and silver by Hephaestus were taking guard of the palace of Alkinoos, the king of the Phaeacians. The most impressive robot described in the Odyssey, however, is the miraculous ships of the Phaeacians. These ships possessed the following robotic characteristics. They did not need to be governed by a captain. They were not even equipped with a helm. They sensed the desire of the passenger regarding his destination. They were self-regulated in a way to face any hazard against their safety, and they reached their destination even during a cloudy night. The vision of an absolute robot is apparent in this epic image. The most impressive robot offered by Zeus himself to his girlfriend Europa was the famous Talos, a bronze giant, fully operational like a human being. An internal hydraulic system allowed an artificial blood, the so-called ichor, like melted lead, to circulate in the body of the robot and animate it. Talos, stepping over the heels of Crete, used to throw large stones against any foreign ship approaching the coast of the island. Let's have a look now to automata in classical times. The first reference on the actual existence of automata is made in the scientific writings of the ancient Greek scientist and philosopher Aristotle back in around 400 BCE. Aristotle mentions that series of tangent wheels, like those shown in the picture, are dedicated to temples as small wheels in bronze and iron. And, she continues, the technicians are making the apparatus hide its starting part so that only the manifest part of it be admired, whereas its cause remains unseen. It is clear that in the time of Aristotle, some simple automata were presented in public shows, or perhaps for religious purposes, producing the wonder of the people. Aristotle's clear knowledge on the automata of his time gave him the inspiration to formulate his famous utopian statement: if the machines ordered, that is, automata, or having prescience, that is, robots, were able to perform their work, there would be no need of slaves for the rulers. This is historically very important, I submit. Another of man's oldest dreams is to be able to fly. It seems that the first ever flying device was designed as early as the 5th century BCE by Archytas, the Pythagorean, the inventor of the mathematical mechanics, in Magna Graecia. As described in the writings of Aulus Gellius, Archytas designed and built the first artificial self-propelled flying device, a bird-shaped model called it the pigeon. According to the philosopher Favorinus, who was a Roman but he has written in Greek, he was a most diligent searcher of ancient records, Archytas made a wooden model of a dove with such mechanical ingenuity and art that it flew, so nicely balanced was it with weight, and moved by a current of air enclosed and hidden within it. Incidentally, ladies and gentlemen, this is my model, which weighs only 600 grams. And according to our mathematical tests, it would be able to fly for more than 10 meters by if the compressed air inside it with a volume of, say, 2 liters and the pressure of 2 atmospheres would be able to self-propel it, but we have not finished this final experiment yet. Now come to the Hellenistic automata in Alexandria after the year 300 BCE. Ctesibius, the father of the Alexandrian technology, his disciple Philon, or Philo, if you wish, of Byzantium, as well as Hieron of Alexandria, were the protagonists. Hieron of Alexandria, in his book Automata Poetiki, wrote, in our automata, the combination of air, water, and solids results in various situations which offer the means to face very important needs of life. I underline this saying of Hieron of Alexandria because several writers submit that they were only little toys, but Hieron himself assures you that it is to serve very important needs of life or to produce impressive surprise, which is another eventuality. Philon used to say that we were lucky, Hieron continues, we were lucky to have in Alexandria, to have kings who were vividly supporting science and technology. Now I start with wonder automata. The alteration of liquids was a wonder automaton designed by Hieron, which consisted of 2 amphoras. Once you poured red wine in the first vessel, water came out of the second vessel. Hidden pipes ensured flow regulation by means of pressure of the enclosed air mass. The hovering sphere must have looked like pure magic in the eyes of the ancients, as the steam coming out of the vessel retained a hollow sphere in the air. After a sacrificial fire has been set alight upon an altar, figurines would be seen dancing. The heated air would go through the little tube into the pipe and be forced out of this into the small tubes, and exerting pressure on the casing of the altar could cause the pipe and the dancing figurines to revolve. The thirsty animal, another of Hieron's wonder creations, is an example of this sensorial experience. The first siphon to the left of this image brings the water to the lower reservoir, eta, theta, kappa, lambda. The central lower siphon, mu, nu, psi, empties the lower reservoir, creating in it a vacuum of air. Thus, the water contained in the pot, brought to the mouth of the animal, is pushed by the atmospheric pressure through the tube rho sigma tau, inserted in the body of the animal. This way, the animal seems to drink firstly with noise. Another one of Hero's wonder-singing automata is the singing bird. In this particular case, when the external wheel is turned, the nightingale on top of the box started moving and singing. A combination of gears and the vessel containing compressed air and trapped within water is the cause of this phenomenon. When the wheel theta kappa is spun, the cord is wound around the pulley and raises up the hemisphere, but when the wheel is released, the hemisphere lowers, thanks to its own weight, into the water and produces a sound by the expulsion of air that comes out of the whistle psi omicron. At the same time, it happens too that the black cap warbler rotates on account of the revolution of the toothed wheels. The first ever automatic door was technically made possible by Hero's mechanical ingenuity thousands of years back, following the mythological vision of the ancient Greeks. Once more, Hero uses heat to enact his invention. However, here it is the burning of an offering which provides the heat. This was a construction of a small temple so that while an offering is being burned, the doors open on their own accord and shut again when the offering is extinguished. I'm going to skip over the detailed explanation of the function of this complicated automata. Another Hero's most popular invention was the holy water dispenser. When a 4 drachmas coin was inserted into the sacrificial vessel, holy water would flow out. As the coin is inserted in the mouth of the sacred amphora, the coin fails, the coin then falls on the balance rho pi. Thus, the stick pi omicron is displaced upwards together with the heavy cover omicron of the small receptacle, lambda. And the holy water starts flowing from the spot mu, shortly though, since as the coin fell down, the balance has come back to its initial position and the cover omicron falls on the receptacle and keeps it dry. This is the first vending machine in history. The idea that by a simple action, by putting a coin inside the machine, one can instantly acquire a product is again rooted in the ancient Greek thought. Just the fact that the first modern coin-operated vending machine was only introduced in London in 1880, originally dispensing, as you know, postcards, which soon became a widespread feature, proves perhaps how far ahead of their time were the ancient Greeks. Let us now discuss the issue of the presence of arts, and especially the artistic spectacles in the Hellenistic times and their relation to technology. Reference will be made to the traditional theater in ancient Greece and its configuration up to Hero's era, which inspired him to create his 2 automatic theaters. Hero designed 2 automatic theaters, the rotating theater and the stable theater. The rotating theater, which is shown here, is a small circular shrine with a central figure of Dionysus in the middle and a Nike on the roof. The basic configuration and scenario consists of wheels set up for straight line motion, forwards or backwards. The unit moves to a certain point, stops, performs various activities. Altars are lit, meletes dance and play tambourines. A figure of Dionysus shoots wine out of his cup and milk out of his thyrsus. Dionysus and the Nike rotate 180 degrees. More fire fluids and several fluids and dances are taking place. Then the theater moves back to its starting point. The devices that Hero describes are powered mainly by falling weights that turn rotating axles and screws by means of cords. These devices are thus distinguished from those which are powered by water, wind, and steam. The use of cords and axles also distinguishes these devices as they are, in a limited sense, programmable. The winding on the axis may be appropriately modified in order to program more sophisticated movements of the automaton, such as moving, staying, and coming back. This is accomplished automatically by the movement of tens of meters of wisely programmed threads that are pulled by the force of a lead weight that falls with constant small speed in a clepsydra. The releasing of these threads accomplishes first the forward movement, rectilinear or even circular, of the automaton and turns of the mechanisms. Second, stillness. And third, the backward movement, rectilinear again or circular, of the automaton and the turns of the mechanism. The starts of the whole show is made by means of a rope from the front side of the base, which only has to be pulled, and the whole mechanism is well. Other slowly falling weights may animate the rotation of the central figurine. There's this one. If percussion sounds were to be heard, a specific mechanism is also provided for this. Above all, timing is essential in the setup of the automaton, and here ensures that the ropes are put only when they need to be and at the precise speed which the display requires. This is a rather complicated machine, I dare to say. The automatic theaters of Huron were the first programmable machines in the history of mankind, programmable as in capable of taking instructions to execute consecutive multiple functions within a given time frame, in the case using strings for the programming language. The stable theatrical automaton of Huron was perhaps for the Alexandrians a, so to say, kind of precursor of the actual television. An entire story was automatically presented on a small stage, perhaps half a meter by 70 centimeters large. Both Philon of Byzantium and Hieron of Alexandria had described such automata. Their function was based on sophisticatedly wound ropes, but they were put in motion thanks to small weights slowly going down. There were many of these weights, not just one. Hieron presents automatically the myth of Nafplius, which is a complicated story. You will bear with me if I only rapidly show here some figures regarding the function of the theater without many explanations because of the restriction of time and the difficulties of showing things without entering into many details. The automatic play was programmed to last for a whole of 7 minutes. One can only imagine the surprise of the ancient Greek viewers in Alexandria as they watched the first, so to say, television ever, 2,500 years ago. Let's now come to practical automata. As Hieron clearly states, automata were made to satisfy all kinds of human needs, like the need of measured time, for instance. Theodosis of Alexandria designed the world's first mechanical alarm clock. Water seems to be the go-to method for in waking up. This is the scope. The opening of the very small orifice delta is adjusted, for example, to 6 hours, so that after 6 hours, the water level in the vase BB reaches the upper end of the pipe of siphon sigma. At this moment, the siphon is full of water flowing to the vase gamma gamma, whereas the atmospheric pressure of vase BB pushes its water content to enter in the external tube of the siphon and be entirely evacuated in the lower vase gamma gamma. Another practical automaton designed by Hieron again is the door's alarm system. When the door opens, the rope psi pi is pulled up. The stick mu lambda the stick mu lambda falls rapidly down. The semi-spherical pot psi is abruptly plunged in the water, and its entrapped air is pushed through the trumpet theta kappa, and two toots, and then you are informed of the intrusion. This is the aeolopile, a simple but revolutionary device which might have started the Industrial Revolution 1,500 years before its time. The conversion, ladies and gentlemen, of natural energy resources, wind and water, hydraulic powers, into mechanical energy was up to that time partly achieved. Thermal energy, however, was now the only natural resource that was not yet converted into mechanical energy. And here comes Hieron again to propose his aeolopile. Burnt charcoals cause the boiling of water tightly contained in a kettle. The produced steam through the pipe epsilon psi eta is conveyed into an empty sphere, freely supported on points eta and lambda. Two oppositely bent tubes connected to the sphere allow the steam to escape, and the sphere is fast rotating. What it remains to be done, according to my opinion, and it was not realized after the fall of the Ptolemies in Alexandria, was to add a simple chain belt around the axis of the aeolopile and transfer this mechanical energy to any hand-operated machine known to the ancient Greeks, as for instance, the force pump of Tassios, or to the ancient musical organ hydraulis. Here you see how the aeolopile is offering its rotating motion into the Tassios pump, and then you have a completely, if you want, some kind of a pre-invention of the steam powered machines in England. But this was not done in Alexandria because this culture was stopped, as you know, and the only missing thing, but in this picture, ladies and gentlemen, every mechanism shown existed already, except and even the chain belt existed, and used by Philon of Byzantium, but it was not combined the way I have shown in this picture. Anyway, we possibly more promising practical Hellenistic automaton is an automated human being, so to say, proposed by Philon of Byzantium. And a maid here who offers your red wine appropriately mixed with water as soon as you put your glass on her left hand. This hand, under the weight of the glass, rotates slowly and mobilizes horizontal perforated sliders, A and A prime. Possibly the figure is not very clear, but is mechanically, I think, correct. The sliders moved to the other positions, B and B prime. In this position, B, the first slider arranges its hole into the vertical tube alpha. Thus, atmospheric pressure is acting on the surface of wine, which flows freely from the tube epsilon, hidden in the right hand of the servant. As the sliders move further to the right, thanks to the continuing slow rotation of the left hand, they reach positions gamma and gamma prime, allowing to stop the wine flow and start the water flowing. In fact, this time atmospheric pressure acts on the water surface, causing the flow of water through the pipe zeta to the glass that still stays on the left hand of the servant. Now you take back your glass full of watered wine, the left hand of the maid moves back up, and any flow is stopped. 7 years ago, ladies and gentlemen, I developed the idea of combining the automatic servant of Philon with the mobile automation of Hero. Thus, the walking servant was produced in my imagination, of course, but making use of two separate inventions of the ancient Greeks. Alternative mechanical solution was developed by Konomopoulos and was put in a wooden sculpture created by Professor Corres, who has also fabricated the motion mechanisms. This automaton was part of the big exhibition of the ancient Greek technology on a one-year tour in China in the year 2017. Ladies and gentlemen, it may be said that in Alexandria, the time had come for the Greeks to realize themselves the robots they had imagined only within their gods, like Hephaestus' tripods, the golden servants, the robot guard dogs, the bronze bull fighters, and of course, Talos. The servant automaton is the closest to what we know to a human-like robot from antiquity and up to today, when eventually robots are designed to look more human. Interesting enough, the Arab writer Al-Jazari, 13th century, presented his version of a robot of a mobile automatic humanoid servant that could serve water or tea drink. The drink was stored in a tank with a reservoir from where the drink drips into a bucket and after 7 minutes into a cup, after which the waitress appears out of an automatic door serving the drink. One could say perhaps that the continuity of the Hellenistic Arabic tradition is apparent. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Tassios, for this really very interesting and stimulating talk. We now call upon Tatiana Boer to respond to Professor Tassios' paper. Tatiana, the floor is yours.
Is that all right? Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Perfect, cool. Thank you so much, Professor Tassios, and thanks to Maria and George for bringing us all together and for inviting me to respond. I think one of the things that Professor Tassios's talk brought out really nicely is the volume of ancient material on a topic which is not necessarily very well known. And thus, from this sort of flight through the ancient evidence, we can get a sense of the cultural traction that the idea of self-animated objects held in Greek antiquity. Although individual examples of automata tend to be cited in and discussed in isolation, you know, Hephaestus' tripods here or Hero's steam ball there, taking a sweeping vision like the one just offered allows us to start thinking about a phenomenon of ancient automata as a whole and not just individual cases. So in my response, I'd like to take up this phenomenon to think both with and across some of the points raised by Professor Tassios. There will be more questions than answers. There will be more musings than definitive remarks, but I hope that it will give us something to talk about later on altogether. Right, my first point of discussion revolves around the question, are all ancient automata created equal? What do I mean by that? We hear of ancient automata of many different kinds in varied periods. This is the chronological picture that Professor Tassios has just presented to us. And they're captured in various, mainly literary genres: epic, from Homer to Apollonius, Aristotle and later peripatetic philosophy, Hellenistic and Roman technical texts. To this we could add anecdotes from historians, even tragedy, Hellenistic epigram. Yet this raises the question of whether we are wise, in fact, to treat them all together, or whether there is some value in deconstructing the very category of ancient automata to begin with. Does genre matter in this sense? Are all these automata the same kind of object? Do they aim at the same things? Do they occupy the same cultural space? Are the motivating principles behind the construction of these objects, whether real or imaginary, the same? To put it very bluntly, is the kind of automaton that Aristotle imagines might substitute slavery the same kind of automaton that Hero makes in his manual, and are either of them looking back to Hephaestus's tripods and the gates of the Horae? And does it matter? Clearly, I think that one of the reasons that it does matter is it allows us to identify the curious progression from, or perhaps better termed, the disjunct between what is imagined and what is in fact created. This brings me to a second and related point on the relationship between, as Professor Tassios put it, fantasy and action, or what we might think of as imagination and technological reality. Professor Tassios's talk ran on the sensible assumption that imagination preceded technical ability, which then caught up. And there are certain ways in which we can go with this argument. The miniature self-opening temple doors perhaps look back to the gates of the Horae described in the Iliad. Archytas's dove picks up themes of mechanized flight, already wrapped up in myths such as those of Icarus. Yet there is something slightly curious about the relationship between imagined automata and those which come to be constructed, which I think is worth unpacking a little bit. And that is what doesn't get made, which we otherwise might expect. When we delve into the mythic precedents, the philosophical conversation, and the technical tradition, the story is not teleological. Daedalus's statues, which are said to have run away from the artist, or even Talos, are not what Hero constructs. Aristotle's robots to replace Stave don't, I believe, take off in any significant way in the mechanical tradition. Philon's pneumatic servant girl that Professor Tassios showed us is first and foremost described as a wonderful vessel. Her shape seems almost incidental, and it certainly doesn't aim at servile verisimilitude with liquid spurting out her forehead. Hero, both in his pneumatics and in his text on automata making, reproduces and modifies various of Philo's inventions, and notably, the servant girl is promptly abandoned from the repertoire. What we do get are processional floats in religious procession, recorded for us, for example, by Polybius and Calixenus through Athenaeus, siege engines and war machines whose names seem to imply they're masquerading as animals, theatrical automata, as we saw, religious automata, symptotic automata, animated cosmological models, such as the better known Antikythera mechanism. At the same time, the question of chronology remains a vexing one if we acknowledge that technology in its essence is bound up in an optimistic vision of itself over time, even in antiquity. So on the one hand, I wonder what we can make, for example, of very early material evidence that seems to betray the same cultural mindset as contemporary literature. So I'm thinking of things like the wheeled tripods from the 8th century BC that have been found in the so-called Polis cave in northern Ithaca. Now, of course, these surely couldn't move of their own accord, but I think this kind of evidence is worth dwelling upon when trying to think through the phenomenon of self-animated objects in a diachronic way. On the other hand, we can point to much later texts, and I think Lucian and his scientific fiction, on which Karen Namali has so many interesting things to say, reimagines earlier technological precedents, both literary and actual, as it were. All of this to say, and I'm in the comfortable position of respondent, so I can just say lots of things and not have to come to any conclusions, that there are really interesting ways, I think, in which we can talk about ancient automata if we reconsider the relationship between myth and reality, as this in fact contributes to conversations on ancient technology and the imagination more broadly. That is one of the ways in which automata are good to think with, as it were. On a related note, we might point also to automata as useful for thinking through notions of innovation and progress in antiquity. The way that Professor Tassios began his talk by bringing technology and religion into conversation immediately makes us rethink the largely and perhaps exclusively economic imperatives that drive our own modern technological advancements. To the chagrin of people like Moses Finley, ancient automata never fulfilled the economic, frankly capitalistic potential that he perceived they could have. Indeed, the suggestion put forward today by Professor Tassios that Hephaestus invents his aids because he was lame is an intriguing one. If this is the case, we can see Homeric automata then in conversation with the development of ancient disability aids such as prosthetics, on which Christian and Jane will surely have lots to say in a couple of weeks' time. Somewhere along the way, however, it seems that the social support aspect of ancient automata gets almost entirely sidelined for pure thalma, wonder. Indeed, it is thalma that pervades each of the Homeric examples already, and I would say is what motivates their construction. It is thalma that perhaps unites our examples of automata from Homer through the peripatetic mechanical problems to Hero of Alexandria. Exactly what constitutes this thalma then is rich territory for discussion. One final aspect that I wanted to reflect upon is the automaton's connection to the human. Is this something that shifts between the mythic or imaginative automata of ancient epic, philosophical automata and the mechanical, for lack of a better word, automata. The golden handmaidens, as we saw, have their own nous. Hephaestus's tripods act according to what the divine craftsman wants. The Phaeacian ships of the Odyssey are an extension not of divine but human will. In terms of construction, of how they come into the world, the tripods and bellows are the result of the sweaty work of the god Hephaestus. In other cases, the role of the human hand in production is absent or at least ignored. Yet it's very clear by the peripatetic mechanical problems in the opening decades of the 3rd century BC that there is a self-consciousness about the role of the human in producing both the self-animated object and the thalma that ensues. Hero, then writing in the 1st century AD, is also clear about the human mechanician's ability to create shock, ekplexis, in the viewer through his machine. In the case of Daedalus and the wings that he creates for Icarus, the technological prosthesis needs the human body to be able to perform its role as aid in flight. Hero's text privileges the mechanic in terms of his knowledge of construction and thus how the thalma works, but he also makes clear that the viewer shouldn't suspect that a human is inside controlling the machinations, giving back some agency to the machine itself. But objects and bodies, as Maria and George know well, can be co-constructed in a host of other ways. And specifically in the case of Hero and his machines, Courtney Roby has written interestingly about how technical instruction both describes an object and codifies the human maker's body. Bodies are not, of course, just human. And if automata making is a divine prerogative, at least originally, what happens? What changes? How is this change dealt with? And is there any anxiety surrounding the human acquisition of replication of what should be a divine privilege? As a final example of the way that the discourse on ancient automata is, among many other things, a discourse on the ancient body, let's take the example of Talos. And I like this example for a number of reasons, not least because he allows us to test the very usefulness of applying the modern term robot to ancient automata. Professor Tassios showed us the famous Talos vase. I don't know if we can flick back to it. It's probably a little bit difficult to do. Maybe I can share my screen. Let's see if this works. Can you see Talos? Yeah. Yeah, I see some nods. Cool. Brill. So, oops, sorry, I've lost you all. There we go. So, looking at this vase, for a robot, Talos is strikingly human. If anything, the artist has gone out of their way through the musculature to render Talos hyper-anthropomorphic. He stands out thanks to the colour of his body reflecting the bronze of which he is made, but not for his post-humanist form. We might like to think about what it does to the discourse on ancient automata to call him and other objects robots. I end on a note that for me, ancient Greek automata are really fascinating as objects of study because they cut across so many elements of ancient Greek culture. Mechanics, philosophy, religion, myth, art, and they serve as rich examples which embodies, excuse the pun, the cultural life of ancient technological objects and the place of technology in ancient Greek culture. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tatiana, for this. The floor is now open for further questions.
I don't know if Professor Tassios would like to make any comments on Tatiana's response. Otherwise, we can open the question to all participants. Professor?